Hello YouTube, it's Dave here with another Watch Love video. This time, taking a look at the Hamilton Khaki Navy Sub, reference H78615135. This is an amazing watch that represents unusual originality hard to find in a dive watch these days, while also capturing a bit of American horological history, which we'll look at in just a moment. But let's look at the Hamilton Khaki Navy Sub by first looking at those four words that make up its name. First, the word Hamilton. Hamilton is a great American brand founded in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Hamilton saved the American Railroad with the best pocket watches. It later outfitted the American soldier with the best of field watches. Then, of course, the quartz crisis hit, and Hamilton was purchased by the Swatch Group, becoming now a Swiss brand. If you're interested in more of the Hamilton history, check out my other Hamilton watch reviews. Then there's the word khaki. This is interesting because the dive watch has just enough of those khaki features that you find in Hamilton's military-style field watches. This particular dive watch borrows a few features from the well-known khaki line, such as those large numerals and the easy readability. Then there's the words Navy Sub. Well, of course, this is a dive watch. It has 300 meters of water resistance and is built like a tank. But what this watch has is a bit of creativity in design that's often lost on modern dive watches. You know, the honest fact is it's not easy creating a dive watch these days. At least not a dive watch that can stand on its own terms of originality. Unless, of course, you're Seiko, who seems to have figured out how to make an original design for a dive watch. Most dive watches can't help but end up looking a little something like a Rolex Submariner. To stand out from the crowd is not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to create a dive watch that varies itself enough from the Rolex Submariner without looking, well, just plain weird, as we see often in some of the micro-brand efforts at creating a dive watch. But before discovering this watch, I'd be honest with you, I wasn't particularly a fan of Hamilton's dive watches. They really don't stand out from the crowd, and for the money, there's a lot of other great options for dive watches out there. But then I came across this very interesting offering from Hamilton. This diver manages to pull off a fairly unique design without departing too far from the fundamentals of a good dive watch. There's that interesting zero at the 12 o'clock, which sets it apart. There's the well-designed numerals around the dial with the amazing loom set inside applied steel markers. I also love the well-balanced layout of the dial with the perfectly placed date window at 6 o'clock where date windows belong. And then there's the rubberized raised numerals on the bezel with the rubber grip on the bezel's exterior, making for an easy turning bezel. But while those things are all very interesting to me, what really captures me in this watch is the case design. The case design is like no other watch that I've ever seen. The case is actually a tonneau-shaped frame into which the circular watch head is placed and secured with 4 screws on the backside of the watch head. Now, this design is not something you would expect for a dive watch, a floating watch head in a steel frame. And really, it adds no particular function with this design. So why this unusual case? Well, it turns out that Hamilton is paying homage to a piece of Hamilton history here. And to understand that history, we have to go back to the early days of the wristwatch. In the late 1800s and the early 1900s, the wristwatch was considered to be women's jewelry. No self-respecting man would wear a wristwatch. Men carried pocket watches. And of course, you know the story of the first pilots asking for a wristwatch design so they didn't have to strap their pocket watches to their wrists. But still, by and large, the wristwatch had not caught on as something that men would wear. And that began to change in the early 1900s. Thus, enter Hamilton's clever marketing strategies. So the first early watches were named after case shapes like oval or cushion or square. Uninspiring, right? Well, Hamilton decided to create a new watch with its own unique name. They introduced what they called the piping rock. Now, what is a piping rock? Well, it turns out that it's named after a resort in upstate New York, but really in actuality, the name Piping Rock and the watch really have nothing to do with one another. But damned if that is not a rugged name for a watch. But what sealed the deal was in the year 1928, when Hamilton awarded the Piping Rock to each and every player of the World Series winning baseball team, the New York Yankees. Now, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and some of the greatest baseball players who ever lived were out on the town wearing their rugged Hamilton Piping Rock. So if Babe Ruth could wear it, what man could possibly argue that a wristwatch wasn't manly enough for them? And that's all it took. From there, the Piping Rock became a best-selling and most iconic men's watch in all of Hamilton's history, and one of the best-selling men's watches of the early 20th century. The Piping Rock initially ran from 1928 through 1935 and was later reintroduced in 1948. Then, there was later remade a quartz version of this in 1990. So if you like the Piping Rock, there are some to be had out there on eBay. But what does this have to do with the Hamilton Khaki Navy Sub? Well, it's all right there in the case. The classic features of the Piping Rock was its tonneau-shaped case with the interesting space between the corners of the lugs and the watch head. The Khaki Navy Sub carries this design forward into a modern dive watch, which is really quite appropriate since the rugged dive watch is as masculine a choice for today's men as the Piping Rock was in 1928. Now a little about this watch. This piece features a 42 millimeter case without the crown and a thickness of about 13 millimeters and a water resistance of 300 meters. The stainless steel case is accompanied by a steel bezel with raised rubberized numerals and a rubberized grip around the outside of the bezel to make for easy manipulation of the watch's timing function. The watch features an unsurprising ETA 2824-2 automatic movement, a pretty standard feature in a mid-range Swiss diving watch. The movement is covered by a solid caseback featuring an engraving of a manta ray. On my particular copy, you will see the reason I got such a great deal on this watch. This particular copy was originally a new watch that ultimately was returned due to what seems to be a mistake in the engraving on the back. The deep discount was really too hard to resist, and I actually find trying to interpret the engraving a pretty enjoyable enigma during a boring meeting at work. This edition comes with a stainless steel, fully brushed bracelet, which features a solidly built, well-balanced, integrated design with links shaped, of course, in the letter H. I don't usually go for integrated bracelets, but this one allows that unique case shape to flow right through the design of the watch into the bracelet. The bracelet is robust and heavy all the way around, making for a watch with serious wrist presence. The clasp has several micro adjustments, which means that you will have no problem finding a way to make this watch fit your wrist perfectly. The clasp is solid steel and secures with a satisfying snap. It is secured by a double push-button deployant with a fold-over safety clasp, which ensures that this watch is never going to leave your wrist without your expressed permission. For right at $100 US, I picked up the integrated rubber strap, which I ordered by calling the U.S. Swatch Group 800 number right here in New Jersey. Within minutes, I had my order complete, and within a few days, it was on my watch. The rubber is a high-quality rubber, though the sizable screw-down bar that secures the strap to the watch fits very tightly, and it doesn't make for the easiest of strap changes. But the option to go with steel or rubber makes this watch even more versatile. With steel, you can wear this thing with a suit, and with rubber, it's the perfect casual weekend or vacation watch. Now, there are a couple of things that bug me about this watch, though they are relatively minor complaints. First off, the bezel action has a lot less friction than I would like. The bezel turns way too easily. I'm never surprised to look down and see the bezel has turned a few degrees just by simply bumping the watch against something. In fact, it's rare that I find the bezel to be at straight up noon. It turns that easily. But I figure that as it ages, I expect the bezel to stiffen as all the gunk of life begins to infiltrate underneath it. The other frustration is the crown. The crown is rugged with 5 large teeth that would appear easy to grab and turn, but for some reason they are not. Most of the time my fingers just slip on the crown as I attempt to wind the watch. The gears are so big that it makes the crown awkward between the fingers, and it's really not easy to hold on to. If I were a diver wearing gloves, maybe the winding experience would be very different, but really in regular day-to-day use, it's pretty frustrating. But what do I love about this watch? Beyond the design, I love its readability. The loom on this watch is on par with my Seiko SKX and my Citizen ProMaster, 2 wonderfully loomed watches. Since the numerals also light up, though with slightly less intensity than the hands, at night this becomes my most readable watch that I own. I love the unique rubberized features of the bezel too. It's just different, and sometimes different is good, and it makes turning an already slippery bezel that much easier to turn. And I can't give Hamilton enough kudos for the quality of this bracelet, especially given how often Seiko disappoints me by making a great watch with a lousy bracelet. But not here. You will be as impressed with the bracelet as you are with the rest of the watch. Now finally, I must point out the various textures of the dial. Hamilton loves to integrate its logo into its watches, and sometimes they go a bit overboard with this. But here, it's very clever, and it's done just right. The honeycomb center section of the dial is actually a group of interlocked H's, which takes you a minute of close observation to really see. But the contrast between the smooth outer section of the dial and the nicely textured inner circle provides a real visual interest and complexity to the dial. So to summarize this thing, if you really want a unique dive watch that stands apart from the usual Submariner variations out there, this may be the dive watch for you. The quality is excellent all the way through the watch. The ETA 2824-2 is accurate and dependable, with my particular copy running only just a few seconds fast per day. There's a lot of steel in the bracelet version, but you can throw on a rubber strap and you have an entirely different watch. As I've said, I've worn this watch with a suit, I've worn it in the ocean, and despite its size and weight, it really is a fun, day-to-day watch that's appropriate for nearly any situation. So what do you think of this dive watch design? Does it stray too far from tradition? Or did Hamilton create something new and interesting? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.